अब कुछ बात करेंगे, मिलजुल कर अब काम करेंगे, तब जाकर कुछ बात बनेगी, जनहित की शुरुआत बनेगी। भारतीय छात्र संसद, भारतीय छात्र संसद।
A prolific author, a journalist, a columnist, former diplomat, former union minister, human rights activist, member of parliament, a man with so many facets. We take pleasure in introducing Dr. Shashi Tharoor. For almost 30 years, Shashi Tharoor served with great distinction at the UNO in various capacities. In 2007, he came very close to being elected the Secretary General of the UNO. He is a prolific author of fiction and non-fiction literature and a highly read columnist. He has contributed as a columnist to some very well-known publications like Newsweek, Washington Post, International Herald Tribune, and many others. A committed humanist and refugee worker, Dr. Shashi Tharoor is the recipient of many honors and awards. We indeed feel proud that such a multifarious personality like Dr. Shashi Tharoor is amongst us today. We heartily welcome Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
सत्र दूसरा, कहां हैं भारत के ओबामा?
Namaskar, Namaskaram, Vanakkam, Salam Alaikum. Everyone here, it's wonderful to see so many of you in this pandal today. I must say that this introduction left me slightly embarrassed. It was remarkable how much research had been done and how many materials found to squeeze into that short film. I can see that some of the organizers clearly looked me up on the internet. And this is something that happens a lot these days, you know. I remember an occasion when a friend of mine in New York was about to introduce a speaker, and he tried to look him up on the internet and found, amongst other information about his family and his background, that he had an uncle who had been electrocuted at Sing Sing prison in America for kidnapping and armed robbery or something equally horrible. But having taken the trouble to look it up, he felt he had to use it. But as you know, in these introductions, you always have to be kind. So he said, our distinguished speaker had an uncle who occupied the chair of applied electricity in one of the nation's leading institutions. Just to say that these introductions, frankly, leave out a lot of the difficult phases in one's life, but it's very good to see that as well. It's wonderful that here we are, all of us gathered, with two very bright young Indian students talking about an American president, Barack Obama. If anything, this suggests how much we are living today in an era of globalization. Why do I say that? Because even when we go beyond economics, our commonplace headlines reek of globalization. Take the newspaper stories a couple of years ago about the 10th anniversary of the death of Princess Diana, tragic death. But if you can look at it this way, you'll see the globalization connection. An English princess with a Welsh title leaves a French hotel with an Egyptian companion who has supplanted a Pakistani. She is driven in a German car with a Dutch engine by a Belgian chauffeur full of Scottish whiskey. They are chased by Italian paparazzi on Japanese motorcycles. They drive into a Swiss-built tunnel and crash. A rescue is briefly attempted by an American doctor using Brazilian medicines. And now you're hearing this whole story from an Indian MP from Thiruvananthapuram here in Pune. That's globalization. But it also reflects a larger truth, which is that it is important for us in India to be aware of experiences and role models outside our country. And so to hear the young people speak about Barack Obama and what he means is a reflection of an India that is opening itself up completely to the world. We are now a globalized economy, and in the world that all of you young people will grow up to in the 21st century, it is a world in which you will have to be conscious of and engage with the rest of the planet. The topic that was given to me was, where is India's Obama? And I asked myself, what do we understand by what Obama stands for? Unlike Vaishnavi, I'm not going to talk about Obama's record in office as president, because that is something the American voters are going to be judging in the course of the months ahead before their election in November. To me, when we speak of Obama as a man and as an idea, we are actually thinking of three factors that he stands for. The first is the rise of a representative of a small minority, in his case a very visible minority, to the highest office available in his country, the presidency of the United States. And this is particularly important because for centuries, black people, the community to which he belongs, were discriminated against in the United States. They were enslaved, they were slaves up to the American Civil War. It was only after 1865 that slavery was ended. But even then, terrible discrimination continued. Blacks could not study in white universities in the South. They could not eat in the same restaurants or the same cafes, swim in the same swimming pools, drink water from the same fountains as white people in the southern part of the United States. It was as late as 1964 that the Voting Rights Act guaranteed that American blacks would be able to vote without being challenged or discriminated against in many, many of the states, the southern states of the United States. So a minority that has suffered discrimination and oppression, that accounts for 12% only of the American population, and a man from that minority becoming president, that is the first symbol of what Obama stands for. The second thing that Obama stands for is the triumph of the outsider. Obama was not only black, he was actually the son of an immigrant. His father, Barack Obama Sr., was a Kenyan student who had come to study in America. While being a student, he met Obama's white mother, white American mother, had a short-lived marriage with her. Barack Obama was born the son of an immigrant, and he was born in Hawaii just 2 years after Hawaii had been admitted to the United States as a state, the 50th state of the United States. So this was somebody very much from the margins. In every society, but particularly in the developed world, immigrants are outsiders. They're not seen as part of the mainstream. They're seen on the margins. And of course, for anyone who has been to New York or Washington, Hawaii seems far away, almost like a part of Asia. So it is from this background of being an outsider, being on the margins, that Barack Obama rose to be President of the United States. That is the second important accomplishment. Somebody not from the traditional ruling class of his country achieving the highest office in the land. And the third thing that, to me, Obama stands for was his youthfulness. He was only 44 years old when he became president. He was a youthful embodiment of the potential of change. 50 years ago, when John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the famous JFK, was first elected in America as the youngest president for a century almost, for 60 years, John Kennedy said, "Today the torch has been passed to a new generation." But that new generation had become older, and it was Obama, with his fresh-faced, youthful energy, who stood up and said, you all know what he said, "Yes, we can." That was the message. The young can bring about change in America. Yes, we can. And that message was the third important aspect of what the idea of Obama stands for in the world. So, somebody from a visible minority, discriminated against, somebody, an outsider, not from the traditional ruling class, somebody youthful, at an age where 44, you'd be lucky to be considered old enough to be Minister of State in our country. But in America, he had become president. These three things, one could say, are what Barack Obama stands for. So we have to ask ourselves, when we speak of India's Obama, where can we find in India embodiments of these three elements? Embodiments symbolizing India's search for its own Obama. Let me try and answer that question. To my mind, and some of you here may have read some of my books in which I have explained this at greater length, the singular thing about India is that you can only speak of it in the plural. We are a land of great diversity. We are a land whose diversity is visible in our geography. We are a land of Himalayan snow peaks and tropical jungles, beaches and mountains, rivers and desert. Our diversity is reflected in our topography, in our climate, in our ethnicity. We are home to pretty much every ethnic group known to mankind. We even have Indians of African descent, of white descent, people from the northeast of Mongoloid and Chinese descent. We have all sorts of ethnicities in our country. We are home to every religion known to mankind, with the possible exception of Shintoism in Japan, but most kinds of religious practices are available. We are home to 23 languages recognized in our constitution. As you know, when you pull out your rupee note, you will find the denomination written in at least 15 scripts. At the same time, if you start counting dialects, we have 22,000 dialects in our country. There are 35 languages identified by the ethno-linguists, which are spoken by more than 1 million people each. So, we are a country of diversity in every respect. We sometimes hear people speaking of the majority community. I think the less hardworking of our journalists like that phrase. But I say to them, what is the majority community? We are a nation of minorities. All right, you might say that a Hindi-speaking Hindu male from Uttar Pradesh might be seen as a representative of a minority, of a majority community. But ask him to step off a train at any one of the railway stations of India, and he will realize how much of a minority he really is. First of all, being from UP, even if it sometimes seems as if a majority of the country lives there, as you know, being from one state makes you a minority in relation to the whole country. Being a Hindu, yes, 81% of our population are Hindus. But Hinduism is not a monolithic religion. You have, first of all, the problem of caste. If he's a Brahmin, well, 90% of his fellow Indians are not. If he is from a Yadav community, 85% of his fellow Indians are not, and so on. If you look at his being a male, and he steps off that station in my home state of Kerala, he will discover a majority there is not even male. If you... Good. I'm glad we appreciate the importance of respecting both genders equally. And if you look at his ethnicity, the fact is, in our country, we are not just one ethnic type. We are a range of ethnicities. Just look at the colors of the skins of the people he will find on that railway station. Perhaps all of us in this pandal ourselves will show through the diversity of the colors of our skins, the sounds we make when we speak, the ways in which we pray to God. We will show the diversity of India. In fact, ethnically, there are some Indians who are technically kin to foreigners rather than other Indians. After all, a Punjabi or a Bengali in India has ethnically more in common with a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi than with a Punekar or a Bangalorean, because that is how ethnicity works. So our India is not an India of any one identity. There is no one national character other than the great, wonderful characteristic of pluralism. We are a land made up of great minorities. We are a land, in a famous expression used in Europe, of belonging rather than blood. Because the whole idea of being Indian is that you can be many things and one thing. You can be a good Muslim, a good Gujarati, and a good Indian all at once. You are not obliged to narrow your perception of who you are to be an Indian. That is our great strength. I used to live in America for many years when I worked for the United Nations. And I would tell American audiences, yes, you call yourself a melting pot. America thinks of itself as a land, a big melting pot, where people from various ethnic groups and nationalities around the world have come, they have dropped into the pot, and they've been melted together to form one American identity. Well, we are not a melting pot in India, because you can easily tell a Punjabi from a Keralite, you can tell a Bengali from a Maharashtrian, but we are instead a thali. We are a collection of different dishes in different bowls and all on one stainless steel plate. The dishes taste different, so they don't necessarily mix with the rest. They're in different bowls. They can't flow into the rest sometimes. But they belong together on that same plate, and they combine on your palate to give you a satisfying repast. That is the idea of India that we celebrate, because it's built on the idea that a nation can overcome differences of caste, of creed, of color, of culture, of consonant, of cuisine, of costume and custom, and still rally around a consensus. And that consensus is that in a diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. The reason that we have succeeded for 64 years in producing such a great and successful democracy is because we have managed consensus on how to manage without consensus. That is the great strength of India. And you know, when Winston Churchill was contemplating India's independence, he said, "Oh, India is no more a united country than the equator." Well, Churchill was rarely right about India. But what we have been able to prove is that we collectively as a people can strive together on that thali, on that common plate, and work for the same aspirations as a nation. Now this India is the India that I'm proud to speak of today. So when we look at those three criteria that I mentioned for Obama, where would we look to find India's Obamas under those criteria? Can we find instances where a discriminated minority has been able to rise to high office? I say proudly yes. The founding father of our Constitution, the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constituent Assembly, India's James Madison, was Dr. B.R. Ambedkar from this wonderful state of Maharashtra. He was born in very impoverished circumstances, but he was picked up because of his brilliance by patrons of higher castes who gave him the opportunities that he seized with such ability that he went on to become a doctorate both in the UK and in America, a lawyer qualified in London, the first Indian principal of the Government Law College of Mumbai, and he has given us our policies of affirmative action, the first and farthest reaching policy of affirmative action against for discriminated minorities in the world. And one of the beneficiaries of Dr. Ambedkar's legacy was a man I was privileged to call a friend for some years, Dr. K.R. Narayanan, from my state of Kerala, who was born into a Dalit family, who had to overcome deep, deep disadvantages to pursue his studies. He lived in a thatched hut without running water, without an indoor toilet. He still came first in the university, and when he did, discrimination was so great that he was not allowed to receive his degree at the same convocation ceremony as his upper caste classmates. This man, having come first in the university, went on to become the Rashtrapati, the President of India. That is what our democracy, with Dr. Ambedkar's vision and with the opportunities that exist for people of ability and commitment that he was able to accomplish. And let me not be political here. Let me speak of somebody of another party. Who could have imagined for 3,000 years that we would have seen a Dalit woman ruling in the heartland of Aryavrat in Uttar Pradesh? Mayawati ji has done so, and that too is a reflection of the way in which our democracy has given the power of the ballot to the unempowered in our society. That too is an example. One can take other minorities. Dalits are perhaps 15 to 18% of our population. Muslims are 15 to 16% of our population. And even though our country was partitioned because of the demand for a separate Muslim homeland, we can proudly say that India has had 3 presidents, commanders-in-chief of the armed forces from the Muslim community. Innumerable ministers, chief ministers, governors, Supreme Court justices and chief justices have come from the Muslim community. I have had the privilege, as some of you must have heard him, I've had the privilege of meeting former President APJ Abdul Kalam. Do you know that as a young boy, he used to sell newspapers for a living in his city near Rameshwaram? Akhbar, samachar, patrika, bikte the wo raaste mein. He went on to become a great figure, a nuclear scientist, a rocket scientist, and then went on to become President of India. And let me not forget what happened with an even smaller minority, a 2% minority, the Sikh minority, which has produced one of the great prime ministers of modern India, our current Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh. In fact, in the 2004 elections, what did we see? We saw the election being won by a political party led by a woman leader of Italian background and Roman Catholic background, who then made way for a Sikh to be sworn in as Prime Minister by a Muslim president in a country 81% Hindu. Is that not what India is all about? To my mind, that is India. In the 1971 war with Pakistan, when our neighbors chose to speak of a jihad against India, the commander of the Indian Air Force in the northern sector was a Muslim, Air Marshal Latif, later Air Chief Marshal. The commander of the army was a Parsi, General Manik Shaw, who went on to become Field Marshal. The commander of the Eastern, the GOC&C Eastern Command, who commanded the troops that marched into East Pakistan, was a Sikh, General Arora. And the general who was helicoptered into Dhaka to negotiate the terms of the surrender of the Pakistani forces was Jewish, Major General Jacob. That is our country, that is India. So that is the first category we talked about. The second, the outsiders versus the insiders. Yes, you might think that we have had fewer examples. The first 7 prime ministers of India were all not the first, I beg your pardon, 6 of the first 7 were all from Uttar Pradesh. And one might well be forgiven for thinking that the domination of Uttar Pradesh in our country meant that people from elsewhere didn't have a chance. But then we did see that happening. We've had prime ministers from the south in Narasimha Rao ji and Deva Gowda ji. We've had a prime minister from Gujarat. We've had a Morarji Desai ji. We've had a prime minister from Punjab in I.K. Gujral ji. And of course, we've already talked about Manmohan Singh ji. So you've seen a tremendous amount of diversity even in that area. After all, if you look at the career graph of someone like Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, this is not somebody who can be considered a political insider. His life was spent as an economist, first as a professor, then working for the government, but in the civil services, governor of the Reserve Bank, then somebody who even worked abroad heading the South Commission, came into our country and was given an opportunity in politics when India needed to overcome a world-class financial crisis in 1991. From there, in many, many ways, as an outsider to the political class, he has risen to the top. In a much, much more modest way, I could perhaps claim too that as somebody without any political pedigree, no political parents or grandparents or godfathers, I too, on the basis of my life abroad and whatever accomplishments I was able to make in the world, I was given an opportunity to serve our country through the political arena. So yes, there is scope in our country for outsiders as well. And then on the third category of youth, there we have a bit more of a problem. Our average age in India is 28. I will not ask you to guess the average age of our cabinet or the average age of our parliament. Youth have still found it a bit more difficult to come up. But that will not be the case forever. 65% of our population is under 35. 500 million Indians are under 25, and I suppose that applies to almost all of you here today. We have, however, some serious problems facing young people. Not all of them have had the benefit of a good education and have had a chance to sit here. 60 million of our young people are child laborers. 350 million of our children have never seen the inside of a school. They're illiterate because they've had no opportunity to have an education. This is the great challenge we face in our country, that even when you are born an Indian, you do not necessarily have the same opportunities to learn, to grow, to develop your potential. As young people, you must be conscious of the less fortunate young people amongst you. The ones whom in today's newspaper you will see Prime Minister Manmohan Singh saying it is a national shame that 42% of our children are malnourished. Those are also your and my countrymen of the future. They need also to be effectively supported and represented. Yes, we have had some examples of young people coming to power the way Obama did. In this state of Maharashtra, Shri Sharad Pawarji became Chief Minister at 37. In my state of Kerala, Shri A.K. Antony became Chief Minister at 38. And today we have Omar Abdullah in Kashmir, who became Chief Minister at 38 as well. But we know there are exceptions. In our country, age and experience are valued, and that is important. We must respect grey hairs. But I can tell you that when I was first elected to Parliament and I sat in the Central Hall of Parliament with the other Congress MPs, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said to all of us something very different. He said, "We have had a lot of support from young voters in this election, and we must always respect the impatience of the young." What a wonderful thought from a then 77-year-old Prime Minister. The impatience of the young. And let me say to you, you are right to be impatient. We need change in this country. We need to be able to address and tackle the real problems of our people. And we need to be impatient with how slowly some things have happened. There has been progress in the last 20 years. Things have moved well. When we speak of 8% growth, we are actually saying that for each of the last 10 years, 10 million poor Indians have been pulled out of poverty, pulled out above the poverty line. But when we have so many hundreds of millions of poor people, that is still slow going. So you're right to be impatient. You young people here gathered in this extraordinary assembly, I know that you want India to meet the standards that you can see around the world from your reading, from your studies, from your travels. You know that there are high standards that the world must hold us to, and we can match them. Bharat mein kya kami hai? Why can we not maintain the highest standards of any country in the world? We are capable, and you too can say, as Obama said, yes, we can. Say it. Yes, we can. Come on. We can. You, as educated young people, you do have an obligation to care about your fellow Indians, to overcome the challenges that they're facing. Yes, your job is to study. This is a student parliament. You must do well in your studies. The first way to serve your country well is to study extremely well and effectively, get good degrees, be better qualified to lead the nation. So you must study. But never forget, in that famous expression, no man is an island. You are not there only as a student. You are there because you're a member of Indian society. You have a great deal to contribute to the nation, and you must You must find the energy, find the time to take the risks you must take to transform this country. Don't be afraid of failure. At your age, you should not. You can afford to take risks. And failure is something that happens to most of us. I've been there. I've had setbacks. But you learn in some ways more from your failures than from your successes. So take risks, move on, and try always remembering those words, yes we can. India's future is your future. One of India's Obamas is sitting right here in this hall. I have no doubt about it. Collectively, let us move forward to the bright dawn of the future. Thank you and Jai Hind.